Woulda, shoulda, coulda. What a theme for the end of the year. So, listen, my dear friends, in life, we do not get to do things over a second time. The clock spins forward, and this is how we've got to live, and we look back and we sometimes say, oh, why did I do that? Or why did I fail to do that? We have hindsight, we look back and we have all kinds of opinions about the choices we made, the paths we took. And hindsight can be a kind of a harsh teacher. We don't get to go back and make different choices, but we do have to live with the consequences of the choices that we made. Now, writing is different than life because in writing, guess what? We get to revise. I mean, it's like a dream come true. The fact that we can go back and do things over should be nothing but pure joy. Yet writers, in my experience, rarely feel completely joyful about revision. They sometimes find it overwhelming, and they can even get embarrassed by it because they're sort of locked into a mindset that revision involves going back to look at their drafts and just recognizing how bad it is. They can feel kind of ashamed. Right. And so there's also a lot of confusion sometimes that writers have about what exactly it is that they're supposed to change. Like, what is the purpose of revision? What is the process supposed to be about? Are we looking for typos, or are we supposed to come up with a whole new plot or change the main character, or what? Like, what exactly do we mean when we say revision? So today we're going to talk about that. It's possible. I'm just saying that revision doesn't mean exactly what you think it means. And we're going to explore that. I'm going to do my best to keep today's talk brief because I know it's a super busy day. It's the week before Christmas weekend. It is Hanukkah. It is a time when people are really busy. So we're going to try to get into it quickly. Before we do, I just want to say hello to anybody who's watching here live. It's so nice to have you here. And let me introduce myself. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I am an author. I'm best known as the author of middle grade fiction. And I have been traditionally published by the big five houses. I have 14 novels out there in the world, which is a great joy to me. And counting, as we always say, there's new books on the way. And I'm also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which brings us back to the banner here. So that's the Path of the Storyteller website. If you want to find out more about what we offer, please get over there and get on the mailing list. Path of the Storyteller is my own platform where I teach and mentor writers who are really seeking to write at pro level, to kind of get the training that they need to really be the best writers they can be. It's a wonderful program. If I do say so myself, the community is extraordinary. And there's two things going on right now. One of which is that the Path of the Storyteller program, which only runs twice a year, is enrolling now for January. And we do have room for more writers to get into that. And that is a really deep dive and in-depth program. It's 16 weeks long in a small group where we go through story structure and writing craft and I will say also a lot of mindset issues about what it takes to be a working, thriving writer. It's a transformational program. And I think it's, if you're ready for it, it's ready for you. If you've got any questions about it, you can get some answers over at the website. And I'm also going to be teaching a live workshop on the topic of revision. And I'll tell you about that as we go, since it's a bit relevant to today's talk. All right. Today's talk, I'm going to start with a personal story, if you don't mind. I shared a little bit of this in an email I sent out this morning to the people on the Path of the Storyteller mailing list. So some of you may have heard this already. Years ago, when I was a young mother, actually, this is about 25 years ago, I had a house in Brooklyn, which was a lovely place to be young and raising children at the time, but it was quite a while ago. And so those of you that know anything about Brooklyn real estate know that, it wasn't always the cool place to live that it has become for those people who think that Brooklyn is a cool place to live. And so I had a little house. My husband and I had this little house that we like literally bought for a song. It was almost nothing, in the scheme of real estate prices. It was a very inexpensive house. And we were there for a while and it was great. But life changes, right? Families go through changes. And the moment came when we had to make a big change and we decided to sell the house. And we sold it. And we were pretty proud of ourselves because we, sold it for considerably more than we paid for it. But what we paid for it was so little in this big scheme of things. And so there's like a Google alert or something that one of my kids has set so that when that house changes hands, we get a little Google alert. And last year, my daughter sent me a link and she said, Mom, you're not going to believe this. And the house had sold for $2.5 million. $2.5 million. And I had one of those moments, I had to take one of those deep breaths, right? Like, well, we didn't expect that to happen. Maybe we wouldn't have sold it if we had known that if we just held on to it, that's what it's going to be worth someday. So it was just one of those moments when I realized like, we did the best we could at the time. But hindsight sometimes makes us say, oh, I wish that I had made a different choice. In a sense, I wish that I could go back and revise the story. You see what we're driving at. Now, this is true for all of us. It's not just true for people who, fail to make a killing in New York City real estate, although that kind of thing often comes up when you live in an area where values have changed. Everyone's always like, oh, I could have bought that house 20 years ago for nothing. But I think this is just a universal experience in life, isn't it? That we look back, and the older we get, the more we have to look back on, right? We look back and we ask ourselves, why did I do that? Or I think more often, why did I fail to do that? I became uncomfortable and I bolted, or I didn't evaluate all the possible solutions. I just sort of took a solution that in hindsight wasn't the best one. Maybe there was a situation that you stayed longer in than you should have, right? You outgrew it, but you hung around longer than you should have. Or maybe there was a situation that you left too soon. You just didn't hang around long enough to really see if it was going to bear fruit. Okay. I think most of these choices, when we look back and we go, oh, that wasn't really the smartest thing to do, involve this idea of short-term discomfort versus long-term gain, right? We know when we're uncomfortable in the moment because we can feel it and we don't like it. Nobody likes being uncomfortable. Long-term gain feels a little bit more abstract. And it's sometimes hard to embrace short-term discomfort, which is very palpable, for long-term gain, which feels abstract and theoretical, right? Now, all of my Path of the Storyteller students who study story structure with me and go through all of the story energies that tend to uh, empower the progression of a well-told story will recognize that there is this stage of refusal that stories deal with, in which our main character is often presented with an adventure that they are really meant to take, and they refuse it, and they try to get out of it. And it's our job as storytellers to manipulate the events of the story so that our hero not only goes on the adventure, goes on the journey, but stays on it. As difficult as it is, they stay on the journey. It's the only way they're going to bear the fruits of transformation that a well-told story is trying to deliver to the hero of the tale, and also by implication to the reader, the pleasure of transformation for the reader. But in real life, it's just the same. It's one of the reasons that stories are so compelling, is that they are an extremely accurate description of what we all go through in real life. So that's what story structure is all about. And real life is filled with refusals. It's filled with tests and obstacles. And we are the hero of our own stories in real life. And we are prey to these things. We sometimes refuse a call to adventure. Sometimes we get into the second act and an obstacle comes up or a test is presented and it's too difficult. And we don't actually know, how to go on. And so we bail out. We don't have like a storyteller writing the tale of our own lives in such a way that we never abandon the adventure. Sometimes we do. We wait for another adventure to come along. Now, in hindsight, we can see all this in real life, right? And the emotion that comes with that hindsight, it can be regret. We can have regrets about refusing the call to adventure, about bailing out of an adventure. We regret saying yes to the wrong things and saying no to the wrong things. We give up too soon, right? All of the things. And this quality of regret, this is a painful emotion. I mean, regret's quite a painful emotion for the very reason that we don't have the ability to go back and change what happened. We can change what we do in the future, but we can't go back in time and change what happened. And so sometimes we could stand in judgment of the quote unquote mistakes that we made in the past. We might be cross with our younger selves for wasting time, for not having more clarity, for not planning ahead. We may even feel that we have the need to forgive ourselves for the past mistakes. We may feel like wounded and like transgressed upon. We've got to forgive our younger selves for making little messes that we then have to clean up, or failing to seize opportunities, or selling houses that really didn't need to be sold, and losing out on future fortunes. So there's a lot of emotions. This is really the point of this little preamble. There's just a lot of really big feelings involved, and a lot of them are uncomfortable. When we sort of look back at what we've done in the past and have to process our feelings about it. Okay. There was even quite a popular movie, which I'm sure you all know, called Groundhog Day, that explores this very emotion, this very concept of how in life we do things, bear the consequences of our actions. And in the movie, the premise is that this guy who's, not very awake, and therefore is always making mistakes and bearing the unpleasant consequences of his actions, gets to live the same day over and over and over again, making new choices each time until he gets it right. This speaks to a really profound need that we have, this universal wish that we could somehow go back and make different decisions. In other words, to give our lives a rewrite. So let's talk about writing. In fiction writing, and all kinds of writing, but particularly fiction writing as our topic today, we can do this. We have the power to revise our work. And it's not like a final step. It's like revision is not the tail end of the writing process. I want to explain what I mean when I say that revision is kind of at the core of the writing process, because I think it's a little different than most people think about it. I want to demystify the word writing a little bit, or sort of change perhaps the way you think about it. We call ourselves writers, and when we sit down to work, we call what we do writing, but the word writing itself is kind of inaccurate, because there's nothing that we do that we actually can call writing. We're either drafting or revising, right? When we sit down to work, we're either drafting something or we're revising what we drafted. And what we call writing is like the sum of those two processes added together. And I think this is an important distinction for writers to make, because when you say that something is writing, or I wrote something, or I'm sitting down to write, it has this sense of being a single activity, but it isn't ever a single activity. Writing is never a single activity. It's either drafting or revising. And so the word writing is like this basket that, just holds the results of those two processes. I won't talk a lot about drafting today because it's not our topic, but, in brief, just to outline the distinction between the two, drafting involves a lot of invention. It is the time in our process when we invent stuff, when we make stuff up, which is a topic that I've talked about a lot in the past. We invent a story. We invent characters. We invent often a whole world. We figure out what happens. What are the events of the story? What is the journey of transformation that our characters go on? So all of the stuff that we make up is in the drafting process is essential. We can't skip doing it. And we tend to record our discoveries in words, right? As we figure out the characters, the story, the world, the things that happen, we tend to document what we make up in language, in words. But most of what we're making up when we're drafting is not really words, it's the story, the characters, the world, and what happens. That's what we're really making up. It's possible, and I had a writer ask me this recently, could we draft a novel without doing it in words? And the truth is you could, you could storyboard a novel. I don't know anybody who really works this way. But certainly if you're doing a graphic novel, storyboarding it would be part of the creative process. Most fiction writers tend to document their discoveries in language, and this creates a terrible misconception that the draft is actually the words that you use to document your discoveries. It really isn't. It's all this other stuff. I mean, you may end up with a couple of discoveries about language that are useful to you. In my experience, when we're drafting, it's really helpful if one of the things that you try to create is a voice for the book. If you can sort of settle on who the main character is, essential in drafting, it's going to lead you toward making a decision about from what point of view you want to eventually write a book. All right, so some things that are kind of language related, but that's not the point of drafting, Most writers don't feel this way. Most writers feel that drafting is about putting down a rough cut of the book in words, and that then the revision process is what? The revision is you going in and sort of fixing the words that you wrote. And what does fixing mean? Correcting mistakes. You're going to go back and look at this messy draft, and you're going to, fix the errors. You're going to make the sentences correct, and you're going to, cut the repetitions and just kind of do a little tidy up, and then it's done. And I am going to propose to you that revision is a much more profound process than that, and is truly at the core of what we're doing as writers, because it is the point of the process at which we observe what we're discovering, and we notice what is working and what isn't. And by working, I mean what is sort of getting us closer to the vision of the book that we want to create, and what's taking away from it. And if that's not the actual process of creating the book, I don't know what is, right? And so revision is actually quite a creative process. It's where we make changes, yes, but it's when we make changes in pursuit of actually crafting the book that we want to make out of the raw materials that we've generated. If you were a collage artist and you spent a lot of time gathering fabric scraps and tearing pictures out of, magazines or whatever your form was, that process of gathering material is very creative. But it's when you sit down to make the collage and start to make some creative decisions about composition and balance and what you're trying to say. I mean, that's where the donuts really get made, right? That's the revision process. So revision, I invite you to reconceive of it as, instead of as a process of going back and fixing things that are broken, as a very active process of creation, where you take what you've discovered and you make it into the book that you want to have as your end product for your reader. Drafting is primarily generative. In the Path of the Storyteller program, we often use the term panning for gold. You're sort of standing in a rushing river of ideas and you're gathering a lot of mud, right? And then you put it through the little sieve and you're looking for the gold nuggets that might lead you to the book that you want to write. So there's a lot of mud involved in drafting, and you're not going to use that mud. You don't have to save it. You're really just looking for the gold, okay? So the process of revision involves observing what you have, right? Seeking those gold nuggets, evaluating it, selecting, refining. It's very, very, very creative. If you want to compare it to our real life story, you might say that drafting is just like life lived in real time. It's what's happening. The creative process, it's often been described as a flow. It does have a kind of an altered sense of time about it. You're just making stuff up. You're suspending judgment. You're generating material. But revision, what makes it revision is that it has that quality of the wisdom of hindsight. You get to see what you found, right? You get to see what you made up. And the beauty of it, and what makes it different than real life, is that you actually do have the power to change things. You don't have to go on an emotional journey of judgment, regret, frustration, forgiveness. The whole point of writing fiction is that we're making it up, and we do have this power to go in and revise the discoveries that we made. So I just want you to think about those big, big feelings that we are used to having about looking at our pasts and having the wisdom of hindsight and being frustrated by our inability to go back and change things. In writing, we have this ability. It should be nothing but fun. It should really feel, like a creative process. It's really when we get to make a book out of all the things that we have. So if that's the case, why isn't revision nothing but joy? Why isn't it? Well, I do think that the minute we put something down, we are likely to have an opinion about it. If we think that the draft is supposed to be the book, right? If we mistake the draft for the book, we're likely to be vulnerable to having opinions about it that are filled with judgment, because we think that that was the draft of the book, that we're now fixing it in this little like tidying process called revision. But we do think that that's it, and we sort of have gotten our priorities backwards, right? Instead of looking at what we generated and saying, oh, look at this fantastic art studio full of raw materials out of which I can now make a work of art. We think that the studio is the work of art. Okay. So this is it's just a little tweak to your view of revision, that when you go to do it, it's not a critique of what you've done, because what you've done is gather materials. You shouldn't be filled with regret, right? You shouldn't be mad at yourself for writing such a bad draft. And I've heard this from writers. I teach and mentor writers a lot, and I do sometimes hear them talking about how bad their draft is. It's like, how can you say it's a bad draft? It's a bad bucket of mud. It's a bad basket of scraps out of which you're going to make a quilt. No, it's the more stuff that's in it, good for you. The more fearless you were in gathering things that might potentially be useful. That's fantastic. That's really great, because the truth is that revision gives us as many chances as we need to sort through, to make choices, and to get it right. I mean, there's just no end to the amount of time that we have to go over it. We don't just revise it once, we revise it a million times. There's a question that I often get asked about the process of drafting and revision. And again, this question comes up a lot because writers are so fuzzy sometimes about the relationship between the two processes. But the misconception being that, I wrote a draft. Should I stop and revise it partway through, or should I keep going? Should I revise as I go, or should I wait to the end and revise it when it's all done? And the truth is, there's no right answer to this question. As long as you keep in the forefront of your mind that drafting is not the book, and that revision is actually what's going to lead to the book that you're creating. If you're able to toggle back and forth between those two sensibilities, you'll be in good shape, whether you're the kind of writer who likes to write a page and then look at it a little bit and tweak it up, figure it out, or whether you're the kind of writer that really needs to go at kind of a white heat and generate a lot of material before you go back and decide what you're going to make out of that material. The tricky part is that the more material you create without going back and engaging your critical faculties about what you're doing, the more likely you might be to get very attached to all of these pages that you've written and start mistaking them for the book. All right. So that's just my one caveat about that. So that's what I've got to say about the joy of revision, the creative energy of revision, how dropping judgment and sort of holding the wrong expectations for your draft can sometimes get writers very um, off track. There is no way that I can get through the winter solstice without mentioning A Christmas Carol, because it is just one of the great examples of how much joy there is in the possibility of going into life and being able to do a rewrite. Um, the plot of A Christmas Carol, as I'm sure most of you know, involves Ebenezer Scrooge being taken on a journey of reflection over his past by three different ghosts. The past cannot be altered, and the present is what he's living right now, but the ghost of the future shows him a rather dire consequence to the choices that he's been making. And the sort of climactic scene at the end of A Christmas Carol is when Ebenezer Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning and discovers that, in fact, the ghosts have done it all in one night and that he still has the opportunity to revise his behavior, that he's already seen the end of his own life, and yet he's given the opportunity to step fully into the present with the wisdom of hindsight, which we never get, right? We never get that in real life. He steps fully into the present with the wisdom of hindsight and changes his choices. He revises the narrative. He rewrites his own story even as he's living it. And he is just, so grateful. I mean, so incredibly grateful. It's an explosion of joy as he realizes that he is being given the chance to do this. That's the power of revision. Now, of course, Dickens is writing fiction, and so he can invent a fictional character who has this remarkable opportunity. But I just want all of you to know that when we write fiction, like that's who we are every day. Like we're Ebenezer Scrooge on Christmas morning saying, I can do it a different way. I don't have to settle for what I've got. I can just change what I'm doing and I'll get different consequences, Now, I'm not going to teach today like actual techniques of revision. Obviously, this is much more of a thematic talk, but I do want you to know that I am going to be offering a live workshop in revision. There is a link to it on the Path of the Storyteller site. You can go check it out. And it is, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It is a live workshop. I'm going to do a presentation. We're going to have some fun little exercises that you'll get to do. We'll have live Q&A. It'll be a lot of fun. So, and it's very inexpensive. So you might want to check that out. It'll be a fun chance for us to get on Zoom together and do a little exploration of revision techniques, right? So please do also check the description box below this video. There'll be a link to that as well. So I want to conclude that, this joyful sense of possibility that revision gives us is true in writing, and I hope you'll find it in your writing. But it is also true in life, not just if we're Ebenezer Scrooge in a Dickens novel, but in your life and my life. What would it be like if we all could live our real lives with that amount of creative freedom? If we were as ready as Ebenezer Scrooge proves to be to embrace the possibility that no matter what we have done or failed to do, that we can wake up in the morning and change the trajectory, that we can just make new choices, that all we need concern ourselves with is today and what happens forward. Scrooge is not given the chance to go back and change the choices he made in the past. He's simply given the chance to be a new man on that day. And that's all he needs. It's all he needs to do. And I put it to you, my dear storytellers, that is all any of us need. And we all have that in our writing and in our lives. And on that note, as the year ends, we'll probably talk about this again in January. We're going to take a little live stream break over the holidays, but I'll be back in January. But I want you to consider now, as the year draws to a close, as a writer, what do you like about the choices you made in 2022 in terms of your writing practice? Are you pleased with the choices that you made? Do you look back and you say, yep, I worked consistently. I wrote as much as I thought I was going to write. I grew as a writer. I I got some fresh insights. I know that I'm a better writer now at the end of the year than I was at the beginning. I mean, you really might have a lot of really good things to say to yourself. Did you move your writing practice along? And likewise, if you feel that maybe you're not as pleased with the outcome, we never get to the end of the year. And I'm speak here personally as a fellow author. I never get to the end of the year and say, wow, I really wrote too much this year. I spent too much time writing. I made too much progress on my book. I never feel that way. I always feel like, oh man, why didn't I spend a little more time? Why didn't I make a little more progress? So maybe you have feelings like that about how the year went and how fast the years fly, right? So I want you to start thinking now about what 2023 might hold for you in terms of the progress you make as a writer. I want you to really think about, letting this year to come be one that makes you feel extremely satisfied and pleased about where you are in terms of your writing practice. There's all kinds of opportunities that the new year might hold for you. Maybe you're going to start a new book. Maybe you're going to finish a draft. Maybe you're going to, start querying something that you've been working on. Maybe you're going to commit to a training program so that you can fill in the gaps in your writing technique and know exactly how to do the things you need to do to be the best writer you can be. I strongly urge you, whether you are curious about the Path of the Storyteller program or whether you have other resources that you want to pursue, to do something that has a little structure in place, because willpower is a bit of a myth. And if we really want to commit to some kind of change, it's really good to put a system in place that's going to create space and accountability and some kind of structure for change to happen. So that's a way that we can really kind of make sure that the goals that we have manifest in our real lives, in our daily schedules. If you think the Path of the Storyteller program would be a great system for you, I agree that it might be something that could really change your way of approaching writing, your way of thinking about it. There's training, there's community, there's mentorship, there's a lot on offer. So you can go check that out. And I also want to make sure that you know that that you can get on the phone with me. You can get on a Zoom call with me and we can go over all your questions about the program. There's a link to do it on the enrollment page. You just book a call. I really would love to chat with you about it if you're interested in the program. All right, my friends, I hope that this little talk has been inspiring. And just remember, we can always revise our fiction, and in real life, like Ebenezer Scrooge, we can't go back and revise what happened, but we can certainly revise the story that we tell ourselves about what happened. And we can start every new day like it's a bit of a blank page. We can learn to make the best choices we can starting right now and going forward. And I'm excited to see what could happen if we all started doing that. What a world it would be. I do wish you all happy holidays. And I want to say a special happy holidays to Hillary, who's here live and just left a comment. She says, wow, I never thought of it like that. I know it's a little bit different way to talk about revision. I know it is, Hillary. Something I've been thinking about a lot. I'm glad it resonated with you. All right, my friends, happy holidays, no matter which holidays you celebrate, even if you celebrate none. Today's the winter solstice, so our planet is having a nice little party today, a real change as the rhythm of the days starts to change. It's a really good time to start to think about some of these issues, right? As we are on the fulcrum, right? From the days getting shorter to the days getting longer. It's a really nice moment to consider how we might pivot differently from this present moment into the future. I hope that this talk has given you lots to think about. If you're watching the replay or you just have more thoughts to share, leave them in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. All right, my friends, I'll talk to you next year. Take care.